Yeah, why don't we go ahead and then we can send out the recording as well for those who are unable to join.
Sure. I mean, this is the real intent of this, and maybe the challenge here. And Tanya, where you weren't on the actually on the delegation, it's going to be a little tough. But the whole goal of this conversation is really to talk about what are the contacts that were made, what were the really good, valuable ones that each company made. Have there been any outcomes yet? Any specific post-event actions that still need to be taken? Are there results? And then next steps, anything that either that are sort of big milestones or things that we can help with. And then we'll talk a little bit about just some strategies that may help in the coming days in terms of any of the follow-ups and so on, and certainly do any questions. But Tanya, do you feel like you kind of know enough about Matt's experience to share about the contacts made and the value of those?
I believe so. I'm just going to double check if the ones that I have are the most up to date. So I'll do that while you're doing the recording. It's fine. I'll find out.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is, just in the hopes that some folks show up, we'll kind of reverse the agenda and we'll talk about the strategies first, which will be more kind of be sharing a couple of ideas, and then we can kind of talk about any of the results that any of the companies had. So yeah, so there were kind of three areas that, from a strategy standpoint, post-event, that I wanted to talk to, and they really all relate to follow-up, which is often where a lot of us struggle post any kind of event. It's just we come back, we get back into the swing of things, and it's very easy to not be as diligent with the follow-up. But ultimately, if we don't, then there really probably wasn't a lot of purpose in going to the event or participating in the delegation. So we want to make sure we do it. So the couple of areas I wanted to talk about was, number one, getting a reply. So obviously we want to do whatever relevant follow-up. It could be phone calls. In that case, we want to make sure if we don't connect directly that we leave a good voicemail. And then obviously it's also easy to send out an email follow-up. And we'll also talk about closing, and then staying top of mind. And I'm going to try to relate these sort of from a US perspective, in that there may be different customs that you're used to in the UK, and so I'm not necessarily going to relate to that as much as I am what's normal and what we've found to be effective in the US. So in terms of getting a reply, I think there are a couple of keys. Number one is having a compelling subject. So make sure the email is something that the person wants to open, and the more it's from their perspective, in other words, it's empathic, the better. And it could be as simple as, it was great to meet you at X event, the RegTech Summit, or wherever you met an individual. Just something to catch their attention. But we certainly want to have whatever, generally the goal is going to be to schedule a conversation, schedule a meeting. And so there needs to be a valid business reason for that meeting. And this needs to be from the buyers or the prospect's perspective. And a valid business reason is something that for them is compelling. In other words, when we met at the RegTech Summit, it sounded like you were interested in, becoming compliant, or whatever essentially whatever the element was that you talked to them about. We've developed solutions that specifically address some of the concerns that you talked about. would Monday or Tuesday next week be best for a conversation, whatever the, you know, sort of the close is, but the real key is making sure that there's a value proposition from the prospect's perspective that gives them a compelling reason to say yes. That's really kind of the key. And I'll pause. Are there any questions about that, making sure you have a solid value proposition?
No, no questions from me.
Cool. Cool.
Bill, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
In terms of how you phrase that, and I guess in one sense tailoring it to the company, but also trying to really get that, add a hook in there, because obviously there's a lot of different companies that are vying for you know, a lot of these people's attention, and then there's also the element of, especially if it's like one of the larger banks that a lot of the companies are already selling into or looking to sell into. There's always the struggle of, could we do this internally as opposed to bringing an external partner in? How do you knowing those issues going in, how do you sort of structure that initial conversation? Yeah,
no, I think that gives good context. But you know, not only do you need to have a valid business reason, but also something that substantiates, at least very briefly, why you know, the conversation with you would be valuable for them. And so, yeah, I think you know, I would focus more on the pain as opposed to the solution. You know, what is it that, you know, if they're trying to avoid what? They're trying to avoid either, you know, some fines or, you know, imprisonment. I mean, what are they so essentially trying to avoid or run away from? And so I would say, you know, really focusing on how, and again, I think this is, you don't want detail here. This is where you're just trying to give them enough. And as you said, kind of set the hook so that they reply and agree to that meeting. So I would, you know, I think very briefly describe the pain that you understand that they have, and then saying you know, essentially that's something that we've, you know, built solutions for, and you know, whether you know, you have reference clients that are, you know, recognizable by them, or you know, anything like that can build your credibility. But again, I think you kind of fight the battle of how do you do this, both so it's compelling, but also so it's exceptionally brief. I think those are the two key things. In your case, are there a reference client or two that you might reference?
I think that sounds good. I definitely like what you said about focusing on the issues that they're facing instead of the solution. Yeah, I think for several of the clients, and I know in one of our roundtable discussions with some of the big banks, that was just one of the topics that or key takeaways that came out of that was how do you handle that approach, given, you know, how difficult it can be sometimes for the word, you know, for your message to get across, and for these companies to really take a serious look. Sure.
And it may be even another way to think about it when you know, you sort of talk about pain is there's a tendency to talk about features, you know, when people are sharing their solutions. And in this case, you know, you're really talking about the cousin of the benefit, which is, you know, before you talk about the benefit, you're going to talk about the challenge or the pain that client has. So I think in this case, you want to sort of correspond, you know, hey, because this is, you know, ultimately how you're communicating becomes the agenda for that first meeting. And you're going to, you know, obviously it's going to be something like, you know, after they agree to the meeting and you're now setting that agenda, it's going to be, you know, just as we spoke about, you know, at the RegTech Summit, you know, you've talked about these issues, and what we'd like to talk about today are, you know, ways that can be solved, and that again, that, you know, you're not going to have to deal with you know, worry about getting fines or being in the front page of the paper for something, you know, really bad exposure for some infringement, you know, whatever, whatever you're, whatever is going to make them, you know, sort of sit up straight in their chair, I suppose. So yeah, in terms of getting a reply, and I think the other thing about getting a reply, you know, I think my guess is, and I deal with people all over the world, and there are going to be people that don't follow up quickly or well, no matter, you know, no matter how compelling we are. So I think you need to be prepared with a strategy that is, that, you know, that you're going to have multiple outreaches to actually get somebody to agree to an appointment. There are going to be some that reply right away, and that's certainly a great indication of interest or of non-interest, but either way, that's great. And there are going to be others that we're going to need to possibly email more than once or even a few times, or we might want to make some phone calls, whatever the case is, or there may be somebody else in their company that was also, you know, at the event or that we met that we might reach out to and just say, hey, this person hasn't pinged back. You know, is there another route we should go? Because it seemed like you all were interested, you know, but if you can utilize coaches within companies in the process to get the meeting set, that also can be very helpful. But again, I'd have a multi touch strategy, or at least plan on multiple outreaches. And then talking about closing, you know, I think it's always better, and obviously we can't do this now, but it's always better to set appointments while you're with somebody at an event, because of, you know, just time, distance challenges people have in replying sometimes. But I think as you look at the process, as you do have meetings with people, looking at incremental closes. So what can you close for on, you know, no matter what, on each, you know, in each conversation, you can close on some kind of action, likely, and you can close on a next meeting. So, you know, it's much easier to ultimately make a big close if you made a bunch of small closes leading into that. So, you know, again, think of the various things that you can close on, and you should, before you hang up or get off the phone from sort of any prospect meeting, next meeting should be set, and specific action should be set. And probably on both sides, there are probably some things that you'll need to put together, and there should be an assignment or two for the customer, some information they need to get back to you with, maybe some additional people they need to get into the process so that you can collect information, so maybe some introductions. We quite often call that a hall pass. So if you're dealing with somebody in an executive level, they may not have all the details, but say, hey, we appreciate that this may not be, you know, something you're deep into, but in order to come up with the best program or proposal, it would really be helpful if we had access to, you know, people who have a view on X and Y, and is it possible to get an introduction to them? And we'll come back to you with what we've found, and you know, present a proposal that corresponds to that, or that addresses the issues, so that you don't have to worry about the, you know, when any of the things that somebody in a RegTech role would be worried about, fines or any of that stuff. So, but yeah, making sure that that you're always closing for some next step is really key. And again, the more that they're involved in the process, the customer that is, the better. So the last topic I had before we maybe talk about some of the results is to talk about staying top of mind. And you know, I think if you were going to imagine, and I'll use my hands here, if you were going to imagine marketing shaped like a funnel with the big end at the top, you're really working through, at least from our reference, working through 3 stages. Stage one is awareness. So in other words, you met people on the RegTech delegation. It was the first time that you each met each other, and you're beginning the process of awareness. And so then as additional interaction happens over time, you move to the stage of intimacy, where additional knowledge is built, additional trust, and so on. And then you finally move to the stage of trust. And trust is usually where, you know, from a marketing standpoint, where a prospect moves over to sales in terms of, you know, they agree to a meeting and then we move from there. So it may be that some of the people you met need more evidence of your competence, need to see more about you before they say, yes, I'll have a meeting, or yes, you know, it's worth my time. And so I would be prepared, and probably many of you already are, to communicate, to put them into your regular lead nurturing system. And hopefully you have one that is regularly feeding out to your prospect and your customer base information about the company, whether that's white papers, whether that's invitations to webinars on relevant topics, whether that is additional functionality that your solution is adding. Any of those types of things that are, again, adding value. It may be articles on regulatory change that these customers, you know, would be really interested in. Again, whatever it is that builds up the sense of your credibility, and again, the real goal is to manage them through this lead nurturing process, so that there's a sort of a continued elevation of the amount of trust that they have in you, and again, getting them to the point where there's enough trust that they say it's worth getting together, and a meeting can get scheduled. And then of course they get into the sales funnel, and you do all the needs assessment you need to do, and begin relating specific solutions that you have to what would be important for them to solve, and then obviously moving it from there to ideally closing and implementation, all that good stuff. So I'll take a break. And are there any questions on what I've shared or comments?
Nope, no questions.
Cool. So, well, why don't we talk about, and again, this was meant to be a really open agenda. And so, Tanya, you may be on the hot seat because we don't have, is there anyone else that was on the delegation with us? I see one, yeah,
Tim Sweeney's here. I dialed
Tim.
in kind of late. I'm not in the, I'm just on the phone, but yeah, I'm hearing everything. It's good stuff. Thank you.
Excellent. And you were on the delegation, Tim?
Yes, I'm with Cube.
With Cube, great. Tim, were you on the delegation? Why don't we start with you? Tanya wasn't on the delegation and is representing her company, but do you want to maybe share a little bit about the contacts that you all made while you were in the US?
So digging. Oh, sorry. Is that
I'm sorry,
Cube?
Tanya. I was asking Tim to go just because he was on the delegation. Then we'll
Absolutely.
swing back.
Go ahead. No
Yeah.
worries.
Yeah, I'll be quick on this. So, you know, my case and our case is a little bit different because we have a presence in the U.S. already. So, and you know, we networks and everything. So, a lot of our efforts here have been ongoing for a while, and then they're also stem back to, you know, decades in some cases of knowing people. So it's a little bit different. It's not a brand new market entry for us. We're kind of already working that. But as it relates to the event and the series of events around the DIT mission and the RegTech conference, we did get some new discussions that are really, I think, promising in that there's ways that we can help people, like genuinely help people that have some issues, and so we're working through those. And just the follow-ups and such as you're describing with the delegates at the conference and so on, we're taking those paths as well, and clearly targeting where we see the right people to have the kind of conversations that are going to resonate based on our solution set. So I mean, overall, the you didn't ask for this in particular, the mission and the conference were worth the time and investment. And thanks everybody for everything related to that. And then just in general, with getting into the market here, it's the things that you're talking about, Bill. Some of this is kind of obvious, but how do you do it? Make sure you do it. Use data to drive what you're doing, and just a lot of activity. So that's it. It's a tough market, but there's real need out there. So you just got to keep moving forward.
Sure. Yeah. And there's nothing that we'll talk about here that's going to be brain surgery, but the challenge is actually doing it. It's not. I think most of us know it. It's certainly intuitive. Well, that's great.
And doing it. I think you're doing it well. And you're giving good guidelines, because I think we all get emails and such from people who are just going cold with no touch to it, and
right.
It takes a lot of effort to put the right touch on something. And there's not really I've done a lot of cold reach outs in my life, and I've never been into like standard language. I always try to write the right message. I kind of understand who I'm reaching out to and why, and just give it a shot. Your response rates are always low, but if you can go from 2% to 5% by being smart about it, it's worth the effort.
Sure.
And there's a big cold campaign.
I'm not sure if you were on at the beginning, but we suggest having with every outreach, having a valid business reason for a meeting. So whatever it is relevant to that buyer, but having, again, from their perspective, what's the valid business reason for accepting a meeting, and whatever efficiency or pain that they're looking to avoid, having that really clear and simply expressed in the follow-up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I heard that part too. Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
It's good.
And so have there been any, it sounds like you had some good new contacts were made. Have there been any results? Have you been able to set any meetings yet, or is that still sort of ongoing?
No, I have done. With people met through those events, we've had a couple of meetings actually, and solid ones, and some things that we're looking to pursue. So yes.
Cool. And I guess the last question for you, are there any other ways that that we can be of support in helping your the process be as successful for you as possible?
And so just to be clear, Bill, with you're referring to the DIT?
Correct.
Because I think your services are I like what you're doing. But I'm working with the DIT. I think it's, for what it's worth, the whole mission of the DIT is fantastic, and just the opportunity to help make connections and provide support when necessary is really valuable. So I think that doing what you're doing is really valuable, and I think that you probably have really strong networks here. We're focused on financial services and RegTech in particular, but you have really strong networks here. And if there's ways that we can connect networks in a meaningful way that adds value, that's the main thing, really. And then second to that, I would think if there's as companies grow here, there's going to be a need for building ecosystems and building talent, and so if there's ways to tap into networks to enable that as well, that's really good. But really, I see it, most value is by continually on the DIT side developing the network and then enabling connection to that network in meaningful ways.
Sure. And Hayden and Christy are on. Hayden and Christy, do you want to make any comments on that?
Yeah, I think a point that we really like to stress, and I think we stressed it during the mission and post, is that, the help that we can provide doesn't stop with the mission. We're here in New York, and our colleagues are across the country and the world, every day of the year to help you. As a British company, our services are free for you guys to utilize. So, whenever you have an event that you're putting on and you'd like us to go out to our network and flag that to certain people, or help with bespoke business development, or maybe there's a government body, let's say like FINRA or the SEC, and you want to have that meeting, and having the British government kind of open that door for you is something that we're always happy to do. So there's always ways that we can be helpful, and continuing to utilize those services is something that we want to, we'll continue to pass on friendly reminders, as we continue on throughout the next year and going forward. So anytime you need help with anything, that we're just knowing that we're always here and happy to do so.
Awesome.
Thanks, Aiden. Well said.
Great.
I agree.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
We'll get any final comments, Tim, in terms of actions for you all, or any of the things that you think would be helpful?
Actually, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, whoever wanted to.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that my, I guess, parting comment would be, I hope we stay in touch, and that'll be on us, and we will stay in touch, and with you as well, Bill. I appreciate it. I have a separate thought for you about an enabling thing that I want to bring up to you, so I'll follow up with you separately on that. But Hayden and Christy will stay in touch, and thanks for everything.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for everything, Bill. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. And yeah, was there something that you wanted to say, Christy?
Well, I actually wanted to ask, if it's not too much. I mean, I know you spoke about follow-up, and I think sometimes companies struggle with sort of like keeping the contacts hot, and how would you maybe instruct them to sort of keep that relationship going without being annoying, if that's sort of something?
Yeah, and I think that's the difference between people that are or entities that are prospects and those that are suspects. So maybe backing up just a little bit from your question. So a prospect, to really tightly define it, is someone that has a need, they have money, and they're urgent. And if they don't have all three, then they may be a prospect sometime in the future, but they're not now. And the more we sort of treat them like they are a prospect, probably the less they're going to hear. And so I think we have to have a way in our sales process to identify those that are currently in our pipeline that are prospects and fit that criteria, and actually ask it, hey, it doesn't seem like, that this is something that's critical for you all right now. Am I reading that correctly? And two is, if it's not, is there, and there may be some other really big priorities, but is there a time at which I should follow up? My goal here is certainly not to debug you or try to put a round peg in a square hole. And I think the ability to do that and the wisdom to do that allows the sales team to spend their time much more effectively, because there's no way you can convince somebody they have a problem. I think sales is much more efficient when we sell to people that actually realize the problem and are ideally desperate to solve it. So I think, with that, then, and identifying prospects is going to happen, by one of the techniques that can be used is, with inbound marketing. If you're familiar with that technique, online companies are using offers and allowing prospects to self-identify by opting into these offers. It might be a white paper or content like a webinar or something like that. And so once you have people in your lead nurturing system, you can also use content to test interest. So if you have an e-newsletter, making sure that the articles that are in that e-newsletter, you're taking a look at who's clicking on those links to look at that information. Those are the people we should be following up with, right? If we have, an article about some regulatory change or some, new solution or whatever, making sure that that there's a connection between marketing and sales, and we're able to utilize that information to much more effectively follow up with the people who are urgent for the solution. And I think we can do a lot of tests that help us better identify those people, as opposed to, if we've got, 1,000 people in our database, we want to work with the 10 that are actually in motion, or the 15, but it's probably not a big number. It's probably a real subset of the overall that are in motion and at right now that are urgent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. So Tanya, maybe you've had a chance to get some feedback from some of your team, but maybe it's similar questions that Tim related to, which was about the contacts that were made in New York. What can you share with us about the value the contacts made, or the number, and what the action's been so far with them?
Of course. So as I said, I haven't been there, so there might be more things. But as far as in today, I know that we had Stuart, our CEO, whenever he was at the delegation, he met with I believe the managing director of the Barclays Rise, the ones that was part of the program, and which was really good, because it was we had been in contact with them before, and then from that point there was further introductions made. So at this stage they're back in New York. Actually they were there just this week for a different event. But it's good because obviously it hasn't been that long ago and the presence is still there. And it was, they had a really good feedback whenever they came back. And there were I think there were 3 new contacts made from that introduction as well. So at this stage, the next steps will be just to chase a bit more. I believe we've already sent, as you said, the bit of a background of what we do, what the company. The introductions were really good because we already kind of had the idea of what the problem was that they were trying to fix. So that was like half of the barrier there. But yeah, that will be the numbers I got so far and the feedback.
Good. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of positives. Do you know if there have been any meetings already set?
I believe they're scheduled for January.
Okay.
Not really sure if they had something since they're in New York this week, but I'll find out once they come back next week.
Sure.
But I know that in January there's something meant to happen there. So
good. And are there any areas that DIT can continue to support your success from the mission or otherwise?
I think just keep doing, the great job you're all doing. It was a very positive experience and it was very well organized. So I think, just keep doing. It's been great.
Cool. Well, great. Is there anything else that you wanted to relate or share?
I'm afraid not. No. That will be it.
I didn't mean to force you, but if there was, I didn't want to cut you off. Let me put it that way.
No.
So, well, cool. That's really what we have as content. Obviously, we want to make this really open. this type of stuff we're happy to facilitate periodically. I think, and just so that Tim and Tanya understand, this is the first time we've done this with a DIT audience. So we're exercising this muscle a little bit in terms of figuring out the right way to do a post-delegation follow-up and to make sure that, I think we all go on these delegations to get as much out of them as we can. And obviously, to Tim's point, each company should have its own agenda. Everybody's at a different stage. They have different goals. And so the outcomes are going to be a bit different. But one of the things that at least we've seen with, looking at lots and lots of delegations is there's a lot of strength in having, even if there's not that much content, having these meetings in that when there's some accountability, we tend to check off more stuff. We tend to sort of get a little bit more done before these check-ins, and it just helps each of us, even with our best intents. It helps each of us just be a little bit more accountable to the process and do what we have likely intended to do, and just make sure that we get the, whether it's a couple more calls in or schedule a few more meetings or whatever, but ultimately our goal is to help you do what you've intended to do as much as possible and get as much out of these connections and the time you invested in going to New York. So that's kind of what we had. Hayden or Christy, anything else that you wanted to make sure that we covered in this?
No, I think that was all really clear for me. Sorry, go ahead, Hayden.
Yeah, same sentiment. I think that was great. Touched all the bases there, and yeah, thank you so much, Bill.
Oh, my pleasure entirely. Anything else, Tim or Tanya, that you want to say or do before we sign off?
No, this has been really helpful. I think being the first, I think, is to really, continue moving forward.
Cool. Well, good.
Yeah, nothing more.
Cool. We'll let you all go. And again, please send an email or pick up the phone anytime. And I think any of us here are really happy to collaborate and help you do as much as you can and get as much out of this process as possible. So kick butt to the end of the year, and I look forward to hearing great stories and great success of you all in 2020.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye now.
Phil. Bye-bye.
All right, take
Thanks.
care.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
Bye-bye.